Hi everyone, this is Joe Crawl, President of the Society of St. Sebastian, and again, welcome to our weekly update and welcome to Pro-Life University. This is an opportunity where we can reach out to you and our audience and to better inform you regarding everything public policy and pro-life. This week we're going to cover the issue of fetal disposition laws. And a little bit of background here, why we're covering this. Some big newsworthy sorts of events have happened, especially within the pro-life community, regarding and pointing to the need for such laws. Firstly, we have the case of David Dalladin and the Center for Medical Progress. Obviously, the trial that's going on in California. David, as many of you already know, uncovered really the scandal that the abortion industry was selling fetal body parts to medical research. In many ways, these children were suffering a double indignity. Not only were they killed through abortion, but they were also being used basically as a means for gaining information on medical experimentation. Again, it was a gruesome practice. It horrified people when this first kind of information was released about this sort of thing several years ago. The next big thing that happened this past week, many of us have also heard the case of Dr. Ulrich Klopfer, an abortionist who practiced in South Bend, Indiana. And unfortunately, it was discovered, he had recently passed, but it was discovered by his family, of all things, that he had basically medically preserved his abortion victims and stored them in his garage, 2,246. Again, this is something that horrified a lot of people. It's troubling, to say the least. One of the things that we fundamentally need to know when it comes to fetal disposition laws and the need for fetal disposition laws is that some of this isn't so surprising to many of us that have been advocating for pro-life laws for quite some time. We know, for example, for decades, the abortion industry has routinely treated the bodies of these aborted victims as medical waste or just plain waste. They're either stuck in a biohazard bag and then taken away, or they're literally just washed down the drain, if you will, flushed down a toilet into the sewer system. This is a horrible way to literally treat these young victims. Now, this obviously gets into some core issues here, and we're going to get into some of the more philosophical issues here in a little bit. But again, it shows the need to do something about some of these horrors. Right? There is no good reason for an abortionist to basically keep his abortion victims as trophies. There is no good reason why these victims should be just literally their remains just flushed down a drain, whether that's down the sink or down a toilet. And there's certainly no good reason why their body parts, their remains ought to be picked through so the abortion industry can make some more profit off of the demise of these young unborn children. And one of the things that we need to fundamentally understand is when it comes to the dead, we have models all over the place about how we're supposed to respect and treat the human body after it's become deceased. So for example, we don't sit there and throw dead bodies on the side of the road. It's wrong, it's inappropriate. Most people would see it as inappropriate. They would be horrified by such a thing. Why? Because, again, there's something about the human body that is sacred. Even while it's deceased, there's something that's phenomenal about it, that's different. People want to show respect to the ones that they love. We bury people. I mean, some people even go as far to bury their pets. And so, to some extent, we need to show this sort of respect to these unborn children as well, so they don't suffer a double indignity. Okay, well, again, we kind of touched upon some of the big issues that were going on here. Again, we talked about, unfortunately, it is a common practice that the abortion industry does treat them as waste, and so they're just thrown away. We have the case of Dr. Klopfer, who obviously saw them as trophies. And again, this is not unusual. Dr. Kermit Gosnell also did the same thing. And we also have the case of, the fetal organ harvesting and trafficking. These are all major problems. And so in many respects, fetal disposition laws, or sometimes they're referred to as humane fetal disposition laws, are a good way to approach this industry and hopefully help us all realize the humanity of the unborn. Like I said a moment ago, we got to fundamentally realize people bury loved ones. People bury people, is what it boils down to. We recognize the life they had, and we respect their bodies and so forth. I mean, even those bodies that aren't even claimed, right? So a homeless person dies. I mean, even the city gives them a burial. They're not just simply discarded. Not simply just thrown away. They show respect for that person, right? And again, I think this is something that is something that's needed incrementally. I think can also help us show the humanity of the unborn child. I think that's very, very important, right? Because again, it gives us pause to think of what's going on here, right? So basically, the law works in a particular way. So if a law is passed, so in Indiana, for example, the law is passed, and in Texas, the law is passed. Indiana just had the U.S. Supreme Court allow their fetal disposition law to go into effect. Texas right now is actually in the midst of litigation. It's in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals right now in Louisiana. And right now, and it probably will go into effect as well, given what the U.S. Supreme Court just did with Indiana as well. But basically, the gist of the laws is very simple. That the remains of that child that has been aborted must be either cremated or buried. Humane fetal disposition, hence the word humane, correct? And so, in many ways, when women have to make a decision, hopefully this is going to give pause, and as the law obviously becomes more known, it's certainly going to give people pause to some extent, and certainly make them think and maybe take a step back and go, well, wait a minute here. We're talking about something that's sacred, something that's important. And I think that's an important sort of step here as well, because ultimately, it points to the idea that this is an actual human being. We don't bury blobs of tissue. We don't bury a tumor, if you will. We bury people. People who have lived and that people who have died. And here, this should give anyone who's considering an abortion pause to think that maybe this is a human being. And a human being that deserves rights, dignity, and respect. I think personally, just from my own personal opinion and philosophical opinion, I think this law is going to have a good effect in Indiana and eventually in Texas when it's allowed to go into effect. And I hope other states pass it as well, because I do think, since law is kind of a great teacher, since it can help direct behavior, it's going to help people fundamentally realize that this unborn child is indeed a human person. If an unborn child has to be buried or even cremated, treated with respect, those remains treated with respect, I think it's going to give people some pause to sit there and say, well, hey, why are we doing this? This is not a good. We don't do these sorts of things. So I think it might have an effect of making people think twice about their abortion. And I think that would be a good, because obviously our end goal is ultimately to save lives, to save unborn lives, and certainly to help prevent mothers from the anguish of abortion. And I think some of these laws will do just that. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you saw, give us a big thumbs up. Again, always subscribe to our channel. We're always looking for new subscribers. And thank you so much for all you do out there for your pro life efforts. And I hope everyone has a blessed weekend, and God bless.